The search party is still out for Clive Washbourne.
How do you bet?
Call for Clive Washbourne. We're 33 and drifting now, aren't we?
Oh, as short as 33.
I'd say. Right.
58 minutes of the programme left.
Yep. Should we talk about the budget, which is due on 31st of October? Yeah.
No, this is important, isn't it?
Yeah, very important.
And there's been
particularly the Chancellor's plans to tax the gambling industry.
As far as gambling is concerned. And clearly there's been a concerted effort this week by the gambling industry to make its point.
How effective has it been, do you think,
well,
it's
certainly been very united, hasn't it? And clearly, I think, how effective has it been on the Chancellor? We'll have to wait until the end of the month to find out. But clearly there are people making very strong points about the amount of money that they're paying already, about the amount of money that measures within the gambling white paper are costing the industry too, the amount of jobs that are there, the amount of betting shops that have closed and the amount of jobs that have gone. So there are lots of arguments, and the Betting and Gaming Council that has made a case very strongly.
New Chief Executive Grania Hurst wrote an op-ed in the Daily Telegraph. Did you think that was effective? Did you see she made a good start?
Well, it was a good piece. It read very well, and it was very easy to follow. So it was, good job by Grania, very good job. Whether these things are read in the Treasury, whether racing just becomes it's another situation where racing betting is a nice, easy kicking boy is something that we'll have to wait and see.
Again, this philosophical debate about whether racing needs to establish itself as a punting mechanism broadly based on skill to try and distinguish itself from online gaming.
But if the rumours are right, the online gaming taxes they'll go up, they'll rocket even more, won't they? If that's something that is being considered.
Nick Timothy, the new MP for West Suffolk, for your MP, Dylan. Nick Timothy, he's put in an intervention this week in Parliament. He got a somewhat positive response from Lisa Nandy, I thought, the Culture Secretary.
To be honest, I've not been following it. I have no idea about the local politics. But
well, he's representing you and your community.
And he's banging the drum hard, and he's doing a good job for his constituency, as he jolly well should be. Yeah,
racing, when it comes to, there's so much politics in racing. The more, obviously, I go to the NTF meetings, the more complicated you see the system is. It's a pity they just can't copy a perfect French system and have it in this country, because it works and the prize money is great. And look, like I said, the politics of it, I haven't even had time to even look at.
You're a busy man, to be fair. A very busy man. We'll go from Britain to France,
Irish politics.
to Ireland. The Irish gambling bill has gone through the Irish Parliament, the Oireachtas, and has been ratified this week. And what that means is that there will be a daytime advertising gambling ban, and that is enforced from 5:30 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. So that effectively wipes out televised advertising across all channels. And this channel, of course, Racing TV, broadcasts direct to home into Ireland, and Racecourse Media Group, the parent company of this channel, Racing TV, their chief executive Martin Stevenson, again stressing this week that it did not have the necessary infrastructure or finance to be able to put together a separate channel, effectively, whereby there would be no bookmaking adverts or no gambling adverts. So Horse Racing Ireland and Racecourse Media Group have to come to some sort of agreement to enable that to happen. Suzanne, the chief executive of HRI.
I heard her being interviewed this week. I thought she sounded quite soothing. She sounded as though she, because when you're in that position, chief executive of Horse Racing Ireland, are you an actual civil servant, or you're a government appointee?
Well, you are a government appointee, yeah.
And she, listening to her, she clearly had been walking the corridors of power, and she definitely was saying, don't panic. I think, what was the expression? This isn't cliff face.
It's not cliff edge situation.
Cliff edge situation.
It's 2026. It's not going to be suddenly turned off.
But 2026 is actually, in this sort of context, is not a terribly long way away. And it's been emphasised that a similar type of law came into, or a bill came into power in 2018 in Ireland, which related to alcohol, and that hasn't yet been implemented. It is going to be implemented next year. So there's a lot of opportunity for chat to go on, for negotiations to go on, for compromises to perhaps be found. So it's clearly a difficult situation, and the bill has now been passed. But equally, it's not right, it's starting next week, there's a bit of time to have a lot of thought and to have a lot of chat, and hopefully some kind of compromise can be found. You know, there is potential for a very difficult situation, isn't there? But hopefully it can be resolved. And the early signs are that people are reasonably optimistic it can be solved.
Yeah, I mean, we talked so long last week about the Cesarewitch and seem to have talked about it most of this week as well. And it continues to be on the talking points because connections of the first past the post, Alphonse Legrand, have announced their intention to appeal. Jamie Powell, the rider of Alphonse Legrand, has kind of had to appeal. Whether he really wants to or not, only he knows. But if the connections appeal, he kind of has to go with it. Otherwise, it renders it rather meaningless. He was found to have struck his horse 10 times, 4 over the prescribed limit of 6, which triggers an automatic disqualification 28-day ban. I'm presuming the appeal, Dylan, is going to centre on whether that final stroke connected fully with the horse. That's going to be quite an interesting test case, whether or not they succeed, I suspect.
Yeah, well, even if this final one didn't, he was still 3 over, so I think...
yeah, but that wouldn't trigger a DQ, would it?
Yeah, but look, I think it's going to be an example made of them. It's going to be hard to turn that over. It's a pity it couldn't be done on the day for everyone involved, especially with the second horse and obviously the punters. But
this is the crucial thing now, isn't it? The timing of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's where the debate has centred, rather than whether or not he should have been disqualified.
I think what has focused minds, why we're still talking about it 8 days later, is the fact that this was the Cesarewitch. You're talking about it, I'm talking about it, we're talking about it. People I've been to the races and the sales this week, they were talking about it. But outside the bubble, there hasn't been all that much talk about it because it looks like a relatively local difficulty. Tiny mention on the BBC yesterday morning and in his interview with Oisin Murphy. But if this is to happen not in the Cesarewitch but in the Grand National, it would mean that racing was held up to complete ridicule. Yeah. The fact that presentations could take place, that payouts could take place, knowing perfectly well that someone else is going to be a judge.
It's the two results, isn't it? It's the one result for the punter and one result for the form book. And it's having two different results is fundamentally the
ridiculous.
issue.
And the delay, the 3-day delay.
So what do you make of Brant Dunshay's reasoning for...
Well, I think you suggested it to him in one interview. Couldn't you have a sort of somebody at an HQ, a hub, who sits there and adjudicates on these matters? And one of his reasons for not doing that was that the Wi-Fi doesn't work very well at some racecourses. Well, that is not a good enough excuse.
It's true.
Well, it may be true, but it's not a good enough excuse in a multi-million-pound international organisation that British racing is. I just think there are all sorts of really... was this properly war-gamed? I think that's an expression, war-gamed, when the rule came in. So that they must have... You know, this will cause complete chaos and total ridicule for British racing if it happens in a higher-profile race than the Cesarewitch.
I think there's a heavy element to this that is driven by international betting as well.
But this, so
I'm not saying it's right.
So the British Horse Racing Authority is open to suggestions.
I can see Dylan's jumping in here.
No, look, the rules are the rules. I just think before they made rules like this, they should have spent a bit more time educating the general public on the Pro Cush, because I think if you hit a horse 6 or 10 times with the Pro Cush, it does no damage to them physically or mentally. It's a really, really kind piece of equipment. I know it. I've watched the race. It looks ugly, but it really isn't that bad. The Pro Cush is I mean, you could whack me as hard as you want with it. It doesn't hurt. So I think racing could just spend a bit more time. They should have spent a bit more time educating people on the Pro Cush before making. I mean, they've jumped to this rule where it hasn't really been thought out properly how it's meant to be implemented and the consequences thereof, which we've got this week now.
And that BHA is open to accusations. It's more interested in business than justice. You know, is it that complicated? Can punters around the world not accept a result being amended? You could have had a situation. Obviously, Charin wasn't. The jockey wasn't found to be in a disqualification situation yesterday. But you can be disqualified for impeding. You can be disqualified.
That's the thing I can't quite get my head around with that argument, which is I mean, I understand if there's pressure put on from external forces saying, you know, our international punters won't swallow it and we won't give you an international betting day if you have rules like this in place. But as you point out, you still DQ horses for interference.
Or for jockey comes back without the right weight, or
this has
whatever.
happened once in however many thousand, was it 16,000 races or something?
Like that,
so,
yeah. But the one thing I would say about the Brant Dunshee interview, that it wasn't a "we are not even going to consider."
No,
he definitely left the door open to look again. Yeah. And I just don't think it can be. You know, there's the quote somebody said to me this morning. The most striking quote in this: "If you expect the jockeys to be able to count, surely the stewards can count." And that sounds simplistic in one respect, but actually it is at the crux of the matter.
Watchboard's still going to voicemail? Yes. OK, let's crack on then. I mean, what was I thinking?
48 minutes of the programme left.
Champion extended programme today. Champion Apprentice race concluded at Catterick, as you heard from Sean Dillon Bowen a few moments ago. On the big day where you're giving out the big gongs, you kind of want them to be at Ascot, don't you, Dillon?
Absolutely. Yeah. Seemed mad.
And Sean actually said that, didn't he, in the interview?
He had plans to go there. But, I mean, if it's going right up until the Saturday, they have to go where they can get the winners.
Of course they can.
It should maybe have to stop on the Friday then, and then they can at least be crowned on the Saturday. It's not a difficult thing to do.
Well, given the fact we seem to be just sort of making up where we put the end of season championships as we go along, then you could surely shift it back 24 hours.
There's nothing wrong with Catterick. That's the first thing to say. However, these guys should be being crowned for a big audience to be able to see them. So it happened on the, I think I was reminded last night, Tom Marquand was champion apprentice at Catterick. David Egan, I think, might have been champion apprentice there as well. Over jumps, Sandown, the last day of the jump season when they crowned their champions, there used to be a market until 2013. There was a market raisin on that day. And then a couple of years running, I think it was Henry Brooke and Lucy Alexander went to market raisin when they were champion conditional rather than to Sandown. And there was a bit of a, this isn't working. Let's just move the market raisin fixture. Yeah. So everyone has to come to Sandown. So yesterday, they could perfectly well move the Catterick fixture.
On a related point, right?
Go on.
On moving the Catterick. The fixture was supposed to be yesterday morning at Catterick, right? As part of this decluttering process. One meeting goes west, a Newton Abbot gets abandoned. They move the Catterick fixture back to the afternoon. A completely congested afternoon if you happen to be watching in a betting shop or happen to be watching on racing TV or want to punt on lots of races, with Leopardstown, Limerick, Catterick, Stratford and Ascot on British Champions Day. I mean, if ever there was a case to keep it in the morning, that was it, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And then you'll come next week and there'll be just 2 meetings on somewhere. That makes no sense. It's one of the things British racing can improve on.
Yeah, for sure.
And Champions Day should be a standalone day to really be a true. Let's have, if you want some other meetings, have a couple of jumping meetings somewhere around it. But Champions Day should be there for the champion horses and the champion people, because the horses are at the centre of it. Of course they are, but people love to see the people as well.
Yeah, I think you could probably have.
And imagine the scenario. Sorry, just one last thought. Imagine the scenario where the champion jockey title goes down to the wire between 2 hard-working but not necessarily jockeys who ride high-profile horses. They could end up at Catterick, and that would be silly.
Yeah. Anne Duffield and Gay Kellaway might be having plenty of winners at Catterick, and who knows, maybe even at Ascot as they team up next season. Economic pressures make it a sensible decision for both of them. Both very experienced. They're both trained winners at a high level. The wider point here, isn't there, Dillon? How much more of this are we going to see, do you think? And you're perfectly placed, really, to give us an insight into that in terms of the economic realities of it. Yeah,
look, I'm not surprised to see it. It's really tough. It's a tough business. If you're not getting the bigger owners, you really struggle. Both trainers, Anne Duffield and Gay Kellaway, both top trainers, both very good horsewomen. And look, it's probably the right thing to get the numbers up. If you don't, they tell you the magic number's 80 horses to start making it a viable business. I think anything less than 50 or 60, you're really struggling. And obviously they don't have those numbers, and it's very difficult. I think a lot of trainers out there are struggling. The big trainers are not spoiled. They've worked hard to get there, but they have the big owners and lots of horses. The rest of the people do it more for passion and love. I think it's really not a business. I was lucky to be an airline pilot and earn a good salary. Back to
what were you thinking?
Yeah, back to it's not a good business. There's no money in it, to be honest. It's a good lifestyle and a good way of life, but it's a really tough business, and I think you'll see more of this, and maybe more, unless they get a training centre style, like an American barn style, where it's a bit cheaper on costs. I think a few more trainers will start doing this, or maybe just closing their businesses down. It's really tough out there. You can see by book 1 and 2 are really expensive, and then book 3 and 4, there's just no money around. So
and it's not going to be boring with Anne Duffield and Gay Kellaway, two
that it's not,
really big characters. Anne Duffield.
Imagine if you were a jockey and gave one an absolute shocker.
Yeah. Yes, it could be challenging, couldn't it? But you know, two big characters. I remember Anne when she was Anne Swinbank, married to Alan Swinbank, another very colourful character, and she's been a big player for many, many years. And well, Gay has been a massive player since the 80s when she went into the record books riding Sprouston Boy to win the Queen Alexandra at Royal Ascot, 1987, I would think it was, 86, 87. So it won't be boring. It'll be really good fun, and I think good luck to them both.
Now, we bade a few farewells this week. We lost Barry Dennis, a man who brought such vibrancy to the betting ring for so many years, not just for those who were punting with him on course, but also for millions of television viewers for his appearances on Channel 4. Clive Smith, the owner of Corto Star and Masterminded, he died earlier this week, and trainer Steve Norton also, Cornelius. So it's right that we remember people who've contributed an enormous amount to the game in very, very different ways.
Yeah, Steve Norton, first of all, was a real stalwart of the Northern Circuit. He was big in national hunt circles, but he won the Marcel Boussac as well on the flat, so he reached the highest levels on the flat and over jumps. Clive Smith, well, forever associated with Corto Star, with Masterminded. Royal Leclerc as well, good horse, ran in his colours, and he was somebody who was passionate about golf, but really passionate about racing as well. Quite a high-profile fallout with Paul Nicholls towards the end, but still some warm words from Paul about their happy years together. And Barry, well, Barry Bismarck, those Bismarcks that you could hear him before you saw him in the betting rooms. He boomed out. He was do they call him the Romford Foghorn or something like that? It was something like that. A very colourful character. But he did masses during that period on Channel 4 when he was in his pomp and John McCririck, the late John McCririck, was in his pomp as well. They'll both be exchanging views up in the great betting ring in the sky. They did a massive amount for British racing, because the amount of people used to say, do you know that man with the sideburns, or do you know that man with the loud voice? People really latched onto them, really enjoyed them, and they did masses for racing.
And Dylan, you'll remember the Barry's Bismarck McCririck double act from your first stint in the UK. Yeah,
I do. Obviously, I was with Robert Armstrong and Barry Hills, and clearly remember it. And I actually watched an interview of him the other night. A clip came up on social media, and it can't be repeated what he said, but it was brilliant TV.
Yeah, that's really. Unfortunately, a lot of brilliant TV then is probably cancellation territory now.
The Racing Post reprinted a feature done by Steve Dennis, no relation, I don't think, this week, and it absolutely summed him up to a T, and I highly recommend that.
Yeah.
Beautifulully written by Steve Dennis.
I'd bet shorter odds that Steve Dennis is no relation of Barry Dennis than I would about Clive Washburn appearing on this programme today.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we getting a Yankee together here?
Yeah. Out of 66s now, you can have 66s with me, Washburn. Anyway, it was a nice idea. Henrietta Knight had a winner this week, her first winner back.
And rather that such an iconic steeplechasing figure should have her first winner back on the flat. was somewhat ironic. But a horse called Cotswold Cottage, successful at Windsor. I think it's fair to say that Hen's return has not gone quite as successfully as she would have hoped and her fans would have hoped, but it was lovely to see. She wasn't, I don't think she was there. Not sure she's a massive fan of flat racing necessarily, but she was racing over jumps at Worcester midweek, and yeah, so she's back in the winning groove, and I'm sure many more will come now. She has a place in British racing history that is unerasable through Best Mate and all those other super horses of that period. And you know, you're banging your hand on the sofa.
I'm thinking, because I'm thinking there cannot be any other professions anywhere where at that kind of stage of life you would go, "Gee, I'm going to take that trainer's license out again and put myself through all that." It's complete. It's brilliant.
Especially after what you've been saying about the stress.
It's kind
and
of brilliant,
everything.
but bonkers at the same time, isn't it?
But I think she's
which
just,
she acknowledged at the time.
she's that competitive person. I mean, she was such a great trainer. I obviously followed her because she trained for, I think it was Jim Lewis, who was a big owner in South Africa in the Steinhoff era with Marcus Euster. They owned quite a few horses there, so I used to follow her. And when you're that competitive and the quiet life's just not for you, it's just the same as me. Even though I was being an airline pilot, it was always watching the racing and wanting to be involved. I think it's great to see her back, and I think, like you say, she'll just take off now. Yeah, she'll have a good. This will probably be a great winter for her.
You mentioned Jim Lewis there. So Jim Lewis, the owner of Best Mate, the owner of Impec of Edredon Blur. Gosh, he really was lucky Jim during that time, wasn't he? He had a lot of business interests in South Africa. So I didn't realise he had quite as many horses there as well.
Yeah, he had some really good horses, and I think Henrietta's best horse was his, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Best Mate, of course, the triple Gold Cup winner. Good to see Henrietta back amongst the winners. Those were this week's talking points.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.